Let's go.
Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. I'm your host, David Horsager. Join me as I sit down with influential leaders from around the world to discuss why leaders and organizations fail, top tactics for high performance, and how you can become an even more trusted leader.
Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. I'm Kent Svensson, producer of the Trusted Leader Show. And for this week's episode, we feature an exclusive clip from the 2022 Trusted Leader Summit, where Dr. Ramon A. Pastrano IV, founder and board member of ImpactLives, Inc., and founder of Third Sphere LLC, took to the stage to discuss his model for transformational leadership in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
I always like to teach, and I always like to begin with quotes. These two particular quotes are very close to my heart. The first one is The Alchemist, which is the sculpture right at MIT. And it reads, "Let no one enter who cannot see that the issues outside are a mirror of the issues inside." So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we talk about systemic issue. And what I try to remind people that our collective thinkings, habits of mind, beliefs, and values are colliding and is part of the system that we are creating. The second quote is a quote for our time. And I think, David pretty much captured, today the polarization that we're seeing in our culture. One of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough to think you're right, but not knowing enough to know when you're wrong. Think about that, right? So right now, one of the biggest problems that I see as I work with different organizations is that people seem no longer interested in truth. They're more interested in finding people that think like them, act like them, behave like them. How do you build trust in a society and a culture that is not interested in truth? Pretty tough, right? So how do we build trust in a society that doesn't seem to be interested in truth, but more into, being validated in what they already believe? When I talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, for me, the conversation begins right here. So a lot of companies come to me, "Hey, can you give me your program?" Bad news. There's not such a thing as a program, right? And when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, there's no finish line. This is a lifelong journey. Why there's no finish line? Because culture is dynamic, it's non-linear, it's always evolving, it's always changing. 2 years ago, we were doing something very different. Then, we got hit with a pandemic. We have to pivot. Then, civil unrest. We have to pivot. Now we got a war going on in Eastern Europe. Now we have to pivot. Culture is always moving. It's always expanding. And we as human beings, we're always adapting. We are projecting all our, worldviews and values and beliefs into the culture, and we are shaping the culture, but the culture is also shaping us. It's constant movement. So when people ask me, "Do you have a program?" I say, no, you wouldn't ask a doctor for a prescription without an evaluation, right? So we need to understand your organizational culture. We need to evaluate your people. We need to evaluate your programming. We need to evaluate your mission, your vision. We need to understand your organization before you can engage in this conversation. So as such, we do not see things as they are. We see them as we are. The reality that you are experiencing in this moment is based in the past. It's based on past experience. The brain is not wired to perceive what it doesn't know. So it's using previous information to help you understand what I'm saying, to help you deal with this information that I'm sharing with you. So we do not see things as they are. We see them as we are. And if we see them as we are, we're using one perspective. For that reason, being able to take multiple perspectives into account is part of this journey when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And the second statement there, we create what we expect. We see what we expect to see. We can condition our brain to do that. About 5 years ago, my son began driving, and of course, that is every parent's nightmare at one point or another, right? Grandma and Grandpa gave him this huge gray van, full-size van, that it was perfect for him. Not for me, but for him it was perfect. was a great, van, and that, the kid is excited. We give him all the rule. You're the only driver and the only passenger in that van. And we want you home at this time. So he goes to, school. He's been doing tracks. And one day we get a call. I'm going to be there on time, Dad. I'm going to be there on time. I'm just picking up, a few things. And I told my wife he's not going to make it on time. My wife agreed with me. We went on a walk. And for the entire walk, I was just really excited because I wanted to show him my muscle. I was going to ground him. I was going to explain to him why he needs to adhere to the rules. So when we walked through the driveway, we just got, super, charged up. I get home, I open the door, I turn the phone, where are you? And he said, Dad, I'm here. Here where? Upstairs in my room. What happened to the van? Dad is in the driveway. So we both, my wife and I, went down to the driveway, and lo and behold, there was the van. Why didn't we see the van? We created what we expect to see, right? So we know that we have a reticular activating system, which is a membrane that connects your brain to the spine, and that regulates what you see and what you don't see. Where you have the focus of attention, that's what you will see. Now, what happens when it becomes to people with human differences, with diversity of all kinds? Right? There are some things that we don't see, and there are some things that we actually see. We have to be careful, again, what is it that we carry in our mind? What is it where we're putting our focus of attention? Because we can leave some people out. So, when we talk about, our mental models and worldview and frame of reference, we all have a frame of reference. As what David shared about me at the beginning. It's just a little bit of what makes me who I am. That is the programming of my mind, being in the U.S. Navy, working for different pharmaceutical, medical devices company, being an athlete, being in different parts of the world, doing my research, all of that create my frame of references, but all of you have a frame of references. And none of us in this room right now is understanding and processing this information the same way. Your brain print is as unique as your fingerprint. 7.9 billion people in the world, 7.9 billion way of seeing what we're seeing here. How do we account for so much differences, right? Very challenging. So all your experiences, whether accurate or inaccurate, will impact what you value, what you believe, your attitude, and that become what? Your worldview, the lenses through which you interpret what is in front of you. And that's how you make decisions. And the product that you will produce is based on those experiences and those worldview, the mental models and processes that you have built. So if your mental models and your experiences are not accurate, what's going to happen? You are going to produce, behaviors and products that are not congruent with the person that you want to be. So we need to understand this really well. We have social media, news media, which is very highly influential in the work that we do on a daily basis. Where are we consuming information and how that information is impacting how we think and how we make decisions? We need to be clear. We need to be aware of our own biases and the assumptions that we make and take responsibility for that. So the question for all of you, all of us here today, is do you want to make decisions without knowing how those decisions are informing them and what impact it might be having in the people that you're trying to lead and on yourselves? So I tell people it's not what is in your wallet, it's what's in your brain. What's in your brain? We need to understand what is in here and how that is impacting how we make decisions. So first things that we need to do to understand is that our mindsets, our mental models, our frame of references not only delimit, but also shape how we understand each other, right? So our frame of references, create the structure of assumptions that we make when we connect with each other. And it's also our mental models, help understand our employees, especially when we are recruiting, hiring, retaining. We need to, which what they believe about achieving, about being connected, about feeling like they are part of the organization. But they also help us also understand and impact how we perceive, how we see people, and how we perceive reality. Our attitude towards certain people, our behaviors, how receptive or friendly we are towards certain people. Our attention, which part of a person do we pay much more attention to? Our listening skill, do we listen actively to certain people, but other people we don't? And we know that male voices seems to capture more attention than women, voices. How do we close that gap? And microaffirmation, who do we comfort? Or, more than others, especially right now, in a moment where we are experiencing so much, crisis, mental health issue, burnouts.
Most training and development initiatives don't last or even solve the root problem hindering an organization. That's where TrustEdge certification comes in. TrustEdge certified partners are equipped with a suite of tools to identify, benchmark, and close gaps in trust for good. Because when you solve the real issue, you get measurable results and a culture where people actually want to make an impact. So whether you're a trainer, a manager, an HR executive, or a leader in learning and development, check out trustedgeplatform.com and see how you can start solving the root issue and get lasting results in your organization. And now back to the show.
So when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, your best weapon is a process of attention and intentional self-awareness. The more aware you become of yourself, the better you are going to be at doing this work. And we also need to ask ourselves, what traps are we, what might we possibly fall into when we are doing this work? So we need to understand a lot of what's happening in our context. When it comes to the United States, we have about 58 million Hispanic Latino, according to Nielsen. We got about 44 million African Americans, 16 million Asian Americans, and we have about the LGBTQ plus community is between 10 to 12, million people. Within each and every one of those groups, there is a vast range of diversity. There are diversity not only of thoughts, of opinion, but also there is diversity that is not even, accounted for because we cannot see it. But then there are also generational, diversity. And then let's not forget, generations like millennials. They expect the organization that they work with to be an organization that is focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So here's a model that came as a result of my work in the Middle East, in India, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. We call them the 4I model for transformational leadership in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. It should be in your handout. The first I is for identity. And identity is not just understanding who you are. It's really understanding who you are at the deepest level. Do you know how to identify your emotions? Do you know how you're wired, how you think, how you process information? I'm a maximizer. I know that in the Strength Finder. I am an ENTJ in the Myers-Briggs. I am in integration when it comes to the intercultural developmental inventory. All of these things, psychometrics, assessment, inventory, they help you understand yourself a little bit better. And by understanding myself better, I'm also able to understand the others around me. The second one is integration. And integration is, now that I understand myself, do I understand other people? For those of you who have done emotional intelligence, notice how close this model follows the emotional intelligence model, right? Self-awareness, right? Self-management, social awareness, relationship management. It is the same. So emotional intelligence and system thinking cannot be divorced from cultural competency and this model because it follows the same pattern. When we talk about integration, we need to understand that context really matters. In some contexts, I am part of the dominant culture. In some contexts, I am not. And being part of the dominant culture brings some power differentials. It is important to understand that as well, right? So context really matters. In which context are you relating to people? In which context you are interacting, communicating, or designing for your organization? Context really matters. So integration is about understanding the other and the proximity to which you engage other people. Intrinsic motivation. And now we go, notice that the first one, identity, go from ego to the, from the internal. Integration, you step outside to the ego. Now intrinsic motivation, you come back to the ego. Why do I do the things that I do? Am I interrogating my thoughts? Questioning my thoughts, my motivation for doing what I'm doing. So constant process of critical reflection. And the last one is influence. And influence is now that you understand yourself better, you understand the context and the people around you, do you understand your motivation and your inspiration for doing what you do? How do you create the conditions where those around you can become the best version of themselves? That is influence. In case you're wondering about the two pictures, it's just two images that I use to talk about transformational leadership and transactional leadership. I heard in India the phrase, nothing grows under a banyan tree. And when you look at the banyan tree, this root system can take, a whole, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 acres. I mean, it can take, quite a bit out of a land. And once that tree dies, nothing grows under a banyan tree. On the other hand, I grew up with a banana tree. When you plant a banana tree, at 6 months, you get another banana tree from the same root. At 12 months, you get another banana tree from the same root. At 18 months, you get another one. The 18 months produces the fruit and die, but you have 4 generations coming. So for transformational leadership, my thing is, can you create the stage or share the stage with those that need to be developing to becoming future leaders? Are you okay doing that? Are you producing life in yourself and in other people? That's what transformational leadership is about. And then, how do we understand, how do we use this information to understand how to address problems when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? Let me say this. On a daily basis, in corporations, in our society, we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging almost all day long. It is one of the most talked about topics. Unfortunately, it is one of the least understood. We assume, for the most part, that we understand, in the same manner what we're talking about, but we don't. To assume that we understand what these things mean in the same way that I do can create misunderstanding in communication. We have a common language when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, but we do not have shared meaning. It means something different to a lot of people, and to assume that we have shared meaning can get you in a lot of trouble. So we need to understand what these things are. So the first things is, as we're dealing with structural barriers, with systemic issues, we need to understand that as a culture, we are what we call reactive culture. We are reacting to the things that are at the surface, the things that are visible. And therefore, we treat symptoms for the most part. We are not treating the issues at the source. When we look below the iceberg, we can see the tangled web of issues that are creating what you're seeing at the surface. This is true for organizations, and this is true for individuals. So, when we start looking down, we can see the structural barrier, the system limitations, personal disconnect, and at the bottom, the source of which creates some of the problem that we're seeing is what? Is us. And David just pointed out a moment ago, because we don't trust. We don't trust. And that creates all these issues that you see here. So how do you address? So when organizations come to me and ask me about doing DEIB work, this is where I start. And this is the model by Robert Livingstone. How do we use the press model to make decisions? The first question is about condition. And condition is about this. Do you understand the problem that you're trying to solve? And do you understand the root cause of that problem? Do you understand the problem that you're trying to solve and the root cause of that problem? Not every organization is the same. For that reason, there's no such a thing as a magic bullet or a program. Do you understand the problem? and that you understand the root cause of that problem. That will be the PR. And when it comes to concern is, do you care enough about the problem and the people that is harming? Do you care enough about the problem and the people that is harming? And that's empathy. But I will be frank with you, I prefer compassion. And right now, as we can see what's happening in the world, we need more compassion. I think it's one of the 8 pillars that David brought up. Compassion will get you closer, to the person. Compassion in the Latin mean to suffer with the other, to enter into the suffering of the other people. And I know that is countercultural, people don't like suffering, but it will help us develop more connection with other people. And when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, it's understanding the lived experience of other people. When we said, I am colorblind, I don't see color, we're all human, what you're doing is you're minimizing those differences that really matter to people. And by minimizing those differences, you are also denying the lived experience of the individual. So the next question is about correction. And correction is, do I have a strategy to address the problem? Right? And when I talk about a strategy, I tell leaders, don't think about a strategic plan. Think about a strategic process. When it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, it's about sailing the ship. Because guess what? You're going to get these storms coming back and forth, and it's going to be very difficult. You need to learn how to pivot. So to lock yourself into a plan is not going to help you. So having a strategic process, a DEIB roadmap, is the best, answer to that particular problem. And the last question is the most important, is, are you willing to do whatever it takes to do this work right? And that means stand with courage in the gap right now that we are facing, that we are, experiencing. Not to go with the narratives or the rhetoric that we're hearing in social media, news media, but understand that this is good for the organization and for individuals. In fact, you will see pretty soon here how diverse team in organizations that have diverse team are always going to outperform homogeneous teams. Diverse teams that are culturally competent will outperform homogeneous teams in every single study. And they will increase more collaboration, more innovation, more sustainability, more profitability. So correction is, are you willing to do whatever it takes to do this work right?
That's it for this week's episode. Be sure to check out trustedleadershow.com for all the show notes and links and information from anything mentioned in today's episode. And we are so excited to announce that the Trusted Leader Summit is coming back next year, November 7th through the 9th, 2023 at the JW Marriott Mall of America here in Minnesota. To find out more information and to register, visit trustedleadersummit.com. And if you haven't already, we would greatly appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, as this is a great way to help support the show and help others to discover it. But in the meantime, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, stay trusted.